It is Friday, December 15th. Let's talk PlayStation. Welcome back, everyone, to another milestone episode of LTPS, episode 600, which we will talk about near the end of the show. But first, as always, a very brief reminder for PlayStation Plus Essential. The December lineup is still live on PSN, so make sure you claim those. And more importantly, this coming Tuesday on the 19th, we have the PlayStation Plus Extra and Premium lineup going live as well, which for PlayStation Plus Extra, we are seeing Grand Theft Auto 5 back on the lineup, so that'll be on PS Plus Extra for, I would assume, at least a year, maybe 6 months, but if you have not played that game yet, you can finally do that. But I would actually recommend Stranger of Paradise Final Fantasy Origin. That game is actually, I think, a lot better than some were expecting when it initially came out and everyone laughed at it. But if you didn't play the demo, then you can just access the full game. Metal Hellsinger, also really cool. That game incorporates a lot of heavy metal into the gameplay experience. Salt and Sacrifice, Mega Man 11. We got a lot of Mega Man love this month because going into Premium, we have Mega Man Legacy Collection on PS4 and also the Legacy Collection 2 on PS4. And as for the classics, those games that were rated in Taiwan, they're already available. So Thrillville, Thrillville Off the Rails, and Buzz Lightyear of Star Command. Now, we do have one thing to point out here. Thrillville Off the Rails, we don't know this for certain, but the PlayStation UK account on X mentioned that it is a PlayStation 2 game. The PlayStation blog also, the language there says originally released on PS2, so some are wondering, is this finally the first brand new PlayStation 2 game with potentially a new emulator as well? Considering Sony is not really directly announcing or making a big deal about new PS2 games finally being available, which I would expect that they would do, I'm gonna guess that this is probably a mistake. It would be a lot more reassuring if there was no PSP version of that game, but because there is, I think this might just be a bit of a possible blunder from the social media side, thinking that there's a new PS2 game that's going live on Premium. So I would say that until it goes live, we don't know just yet, but my initial thinking is that was probably a mistake, but I hope I'm wrong. Now, we also know what games are leaving PS Plus Extra and Premium in January, about mid-January, so you have about 30 days from right now to play these 9 games that are going to be leaving, which would be It Takes Two, SnowRunner, Devil May Cry 5 Special Edition, Jet the Far Shore, Omno, so if you see any game in this lineup that you want to check out and play, then you've got a timer. As of right now, about 30 days left to play those games before they expire in mid-January. Now, moving on to our first news story, of course, it's near the end of this year, and that means the PlayStation Wrap-Up is now live on PlayStation.com, which I will leave linked down below if you have not done this just yet, but always a very cool annual thing they do where you can log in with your PSN ID, and they'll give you a breakdown of all your gameplay throughout the year, so by platform, genre, what you played, most of for a particular month. It's always really fun to look at, and something where, for me, very sporadic. I moved into this place near the end, well, really the beginning of this year. So for the first half of all of 2023, I was just very busy moving, setting this place up. So very sporadic when it comes to my gameplay hours, because really I think 2/3 of my breakdown for the wrap-up this year was all put into 30 Platinums Part 3, which it's worth noting that Sony is not tracking PlayStation 3 and Vita time with the wrap-ups recently, so it actually shows I earned less trophies than what I showed in 30 Platinums Part 3, which was all earned during the month of October. But between all that stuff, and I still play a lot of Switch and a little bit of Xbox and PC occasionally, so yeah, my hours didn't do a whole lot this year, but October I think was seriously pulling some weight for me, but either way, it's still really cool when we get the end of the year wrap-ups. Next up, we have some updates for some PlayStation Studio games, starting with Spider-Man 2, where we were expecting some kind of semi-large update for the game by the end of this year, which would have included New Game Plus and audio descriptions, and a few other things as well. But now Insomniac has confirmed that that update is getting pushed into early 2024, which they're still going to add those things, but also a few other things that fans have been requesting, like the ability to change the time of day, which that's a big ask. And then there's one little, kind of a spoiler thing in their write-up, but they're going to be adding that and also replaying missions, just to name a few. So there's, I would expect that there's probably a laundry list that they're working on, and they just decided to throw that into early next year since it's taking a little bit longer. And a lot of studios at this point are probably going to have some time off, right? That's kind of expected. So maybe like late January, early February, we shouldn't have to wait too long for that update. Now, in other not-so-good Insomniac news, this was being reported by cyberdaily.au, but apparently a ransomware group has accessed sensitive info from Insomniac games, and they are intending to possibly publish that information online. So this may include information on games that they're working on, like Wolverine, but it also includes very sensitive data with employee information as well, and they did provide proof of hack screens about this access, where the group is saying that they're going to auction off the data, with it ending this coming Tuesday, and it has a starting price of 50 bitcoins. A Sony spokesperson has provided a statement saying that they are aware of the attack and investigating the situation, but they have said that there's no reason to believe that other parts of SIE or Sony were compromised. Now, this is not great news, obviously, assuming that it's genuine and there was actual sensitive info compromised, not even so much about the games that they're working on, but also sensitive employee info, right? That's always the more important issue in this kind of situation. So hopefully this, I mean, we'll watch and see what happens here. It's unfortunate. We see a lot of big companies nowadays run into these ransomware groups that find some sort of back end. So I'm not sure there's really much else to say on this. We can at least acknowledge that a lot of fans have tried to look at the proof of hack info and, you know, try and pinpoint what they can see out of that, which there's like very blurry text that makes slight shorthand references to things like Miles, RCE, and MS or SM3, excuse me, which would be presumably Spider-Man 3. I don't think these things are really a surprise per se, but some are also kind of zeroing in on text that looks like it says additional support for Spider-Verse, which has led some to theorize, okay, does that, you know, are they working on a Spider-Verse game? Oh, we know Insomniac's working on a multiplayer title, so would that be their multiplayer game is like a sort of multiplayer Spider-Verse with being able to play different Spider-Men? So that's all pure speculation and something where we just don't really know to what degree this is, you know, how serious this is, and if we are going to see the info published online. I would hope not. So we'll kind of watch this and see how it unfolds, but that was something that was that went down this week. Now, moving on to a very big news story that just came out, and that is Naughty Dog has finally confirmed and made a formal announcement that The Last of Us Online has been canceled. In a very candid post on their blog, they say that it is canceled, but moreover, they explain that pre-production began with The Last of Us Part 2, how it evolved into something much bigger and exciting, and then they went into full production, and they then realized the resource requirement to support it post-launch would severely impact their future single-player games. So they pretty much laid it out there that they had two paths: be a live service studio or cancel this game and continue single-player experiences. And they do say they have more than one ambitious brand new single-player game that they're currently working on at Naughty Dog. So there you go, closure. We don't get that too often in the games business, but based on their language, we can now piece together kind of what went down here, right? So way back in 2019, or was it the same year? I forget at this point, but they more or less pointed out that, hey, we're shipping The Last of Us Part 2 without multiplayer. We're still working on it, but it evolved into something bigger. Then making the formal announcement that, hey, we're making our own standalone premium single or multiplayer experience, which that was kind of a big deal at the time. Then we caught more and more wind of how Sony was going to be doing larger budget live service titles, and surely this was going to be one of them. Then the report about how after the Bungie acquisition, they came in, looked at the post-launch support, the roadmap, and how they at least brought into question the long-term viability of the project, then it being down to a skeleton crew, and now it's confirmed. So I appreciate the language that we got surrounding the game and I guess the ultimatum that Naughty Dog came up with, right? Because I'm sure there's still a lot of unanswered questions here, but it seems to me that it was a matter of, you know, not necessarily the in-game economy and the long-term viability of it, but more so, do you have the staff and resources to continue supporting it in a way that financially works for this game, right? What it's going to need to really carry itself for years to come, which was partly, I presume, Bungie's concerns. And there's probably many other aspects that went into this decision. It's not an easy one, but I think many folks are probably going to look at this and largely be okay with it, especially the way Naughty Dog has worded this, where it's a matter of, okay, if we're going to really do this, it's going to eat up the entire studio, to where we're going to be a live service studio. I think they phrase this in a way that's going to make people mostly okay with this decision, which I would agree. I'm still of the mind where out of all the live service games that Sony is currently working on, this was the one I think that had the best chance of resonating with a very large audience. The Last of Us IP is very strong. I'm sure there is plenty of demand for a PvP, PvE sort of post-apocalyptic experience from a large, AAA studio that can put out high caliber content when they have the resources necessary to do it. So I'm still very much of the mind of this probably would have been a very exciting live service project, and that's coming from me that does not care for these kind of things. But there's still that middle ground of like, and I'm seeing this already where it's like, oh, why didn't they just do a standard, sort of tacked on multiplayer experience where it's just a Factions 2.0. And normally I would agree, but again, I really do feel that this was the one live service game that would have, like, if you're going to do a live service title, The Last of Us IP and exploring that would probably be the way to go. So otherwise I would normally agree with that sentiment, but yeah, it's something where this was very much the right call. Probably not an easy one to make, given everything surrounding the decision. But we can now look forward, and something where with Naughty Dog, I think we can safely assume that the 2 single-player games that they are working on is a brand new IP and The Last of Us Part 3. Really, it's more a question of the order of those properties, right? So what is going to come before the other one? Probably one of them is going to be a possible PlayStation 6 title. That's the unfortunate thing about game dev and the studio roadmap. And we are seeing that one image already came out from Dusk Golem on Recent Era, which shows I would assume this is an early screenshot, and I always caution people when you look at these things, do not judge it too harshly. So we can see a few things on the screen: lobby, study, bunk, battle pass, store in the top left there, being able to ready up for a Survivor Solos Battle Royale. You can see the season on the bottom. So, but I always caution, do not look at this and go, oh, thank God it's canceled. You just don't know what this thing was really going to be once it was properly shipped and in your hands. That's why studios largely are not, they never appreciate or enjoy these kind of leaks coming out. But considering this game is canceled, I assume we may see a lot more of this material start to come out now, knowing that the game is not going to release. So I would caution, look at these things with, curiosity, but don't judge it too harshly based on what we're seeing or, what this game may or may not have been. We just don't know that, quite frankly. Looking at a lot of Naughty Dog employees, it seems like they really did enjoy their time working on this game, and that the gameplay loop that they put together was really exciting and engaging. But, it's something where a very tough call had to be made, and this was probably the way to go. Moving on to Santa Monica Studio and God of War Ragnarök Valhalla, which the news here is that not only does this content have new free DLC trophies, but it's also just, I think, a lot bigger than some were expecting. That's been the sentiment so far, is that, wow, they didn't charge money for this? Which I guess is a little bit of the content is bigger than some thought, and also it's Sony, so we don't have many goodwill initiatives nowadays. But having said that, I will say if you have not played it just yet, you probably should, even if you were turned off by, oh, it's roguelike content. Because I can totally understand some that don't like roguelikes just based off that premise of the core mechanic being that if you die, you have to go back to a certain point. But there are difficulty options, so if you don't like that stuff, I would still say jump in, try it, set it lower so you can go through it and just enjoy it more narratively, because that's the exciting thing, is that this is a proper epilogue to the events of Ragnarök, so there are narrative beats that play out. And so if you were turned off by the subgenre of this, I still think you should go and give it a shot, because there is a lot more there than some were expecting. So a very cool, welcomed, surprise free content that was given out. Hopefully we see more of that. Next up, we have a brief update on the Knights of the Old Republic remake, this time from Disney, not Embracer. So Disney's head of gaming, Sean Shoptaw, was speaking with Axios, and he was asked about the status of this game. So he says, and I quote, "Not a lot I can say on that point for some hopefully obvious reasons, but KOTOR is obviously an incredibly popular game, one that we are incredibly proud of and think that there's still a lot of demand for. I'll leave it there." It sounds like they still very much want to get this game remade at some point. They just have to either find a new developer, a new finance partner, just eventually they want to get this game made. That's how I'm reading it, which if we do go back to our last update on this, this game, it sounds like Sony is probably not even involved as a finance partner anymore for timed exclusivity. So I'm not even sure if we should really be following the status of this game, but it's something where whatever happens, gonna be a long time before it does eventually come out. Now, in the same conversation with Axios, Sean also commented on the Indiana Jones game, which, as we all know, became an Xbox Game Studios game because the developer Machine Games was acquired by Microsoft, and then we learned from the court documents that it became a proper exclusive because the court documents showed that it went from being multi-platform to exclusive. So Sean commented on this, and he said, and I quote, "Xbox still being one of the bigger marketplaces for games, we didn't feel like we were going to be overly exclusionary. We felt like it's still going to reach a broad set of folks, and we felt financially and strategically for the game that made sense at the time." What's interesting about this quote is that I'm seeing some look at this and go, oh, it sounds like he's saying that with disappointment, as in, oh, it made sense at the time, but maybe not so much anymore, which maybe that is what he's getting at, but he's putting it on public record. You don't want to, make it sound that bad when you're still working with that partner to eventually ship this game. And what people tend to overlook with these exclusive agreements is that, yes, it very much is an Xbox exclusive, missing out on PlayStation being a larger platform where there's going to be a lot more potential sales, but the entire contract in place is more than likely there where Microsoft is footing the bill for those lost sales and then some. Otherwise, they would not agree to it, right? So it's always a bit of a weird thing to, sort of make the suggestion that they regret the deal because, they're missing out on PlayStation being a bigger platform. But ideally, Microsoft should have paid for those lost sales. Although the calculations can be not favorable, obviously. Maybe Disney did sign, a bad agreement. But either way, I mean, typically with any sort of, regardless of platform, obviously the one that's the bigger platform, it's going to be cheaper for them to secure exclusivity versus Microsoft in this case, but we do always have to keep that in mind with these exclusive arrangements. Now that's a good segue to our next story about Marvel's Blade, because the speculation from this past week is that that game might not even be a proper Xbox Game Studios exclusive, based on some looking at how it was announced, where the Game Awards, apparently it didn't show the Xbox splash screen, or when you go to Bethesda.net, there's no mention of Xbox anywhere, and also Microsoft so far has not responded to requests for comments from all the media outlets that sent them out asking, is this game an exclusive? What platforms is it targeting? And so that's what some are wondering, is that maybe Marvel is mandating that game stays multi-platform, but Sony can work out exclusive arrangements for Spider-Man, which that's always a misnomer, by the way, that Sony has the rights to Spider-Man, as in they own them. They only have the movie rights. They still have to work out an agreement with Marvel to make the Spider-Man games, and those are exclusive to PlayStation. So what's going on here? I will say way too early. I mean, I don't think this is really all that much different from the way we've seen other Xbox Game Studio games get announced, especially if they're like really early. And it could be something where, with Marvel at least, they might not be on board with it being a day one Game Pass title. Maybe it's so early and the game's so far out that they're not sure what platforms they're targeting. Although I think this is probably going to ship Series S, X, PC day one, or we're going to get it this cycle, I should say. But I think we can't really look too much into it right now. Maybe it's a little bit curious as to why they've not said anything just yet, but I mean, it was like with Indiana Jones. We only got confirmation of that from court documents, so it's just a matter of them really not having to say anything right now. It seems like they put together a very early clip for the Game Awards, and that's really about it. So I wouldn't freak out too much over this game possibly shipping on PlayStation. Fully expect that if it's a Microsoft-owned studio, regardless of the property, they are going to pursue exclusivity to some degree. All right, moving on to our other big story from this past week, PlayStation 5 Pro. Given that we are expecting it sometime next year, that means right now we are going to be in the dead middle of the rumors really starting to ramp up, and that's what happened this past week. So we'll go in sequential order here so you're brought up to speed on what went down, but initially this started with a random leak of PS5 Pro specs on ResetEra from a literally named random account. Someone then asked Tom Henderson of Insider Gaming if that leak was accurate, and they responded saying that they couldn't comment on other people's leaks because he doesn't know, but he does say internally Sony is expecting the full spec sheet to leak out this month because dev kits are now in the hands of third-party studios. Now, if we dial back to the leaks on ResetEra, that laid out a lot of details. They initially point out all the existing info from Tom Henderson about a November 2024 release, and the codename for the console being Trinity. They also refer to the hardware leaker account, Kepler_L2, where back in July on X, they claimed AMD's codename for PS5's SoC is Viola, which that very much continues the PS5 codename trend of being based off Shakespeare's work. So we had Prospero, Oberon, Ariel for Shakespeare's work in or Shakespeare's The Tempest, I should say, and now Trinity and Viola for Shakespeare's Twelfth Night, and the Holy Trinity Church, that's where Shakespeare was baptized, married, and laid to rest. Anyway, the new information here is that this random account brings up PS5 Pro's specs. So they claim Viola is using TSMC's N4P process, and the CPU is still Zen 2, running a variable frequency capped at 4.4 gigahertz. Workgroup processors is 30 with 2 disabled, so 56 CUs total. Architecture is RDNA 3, but taking ray tracing improvements from RDNA 4. Key technologies is fast storage, accelerated ray tracing, and upscaling. Memory is 16 gigabytes of 18 gigabits per second GDDR6. GPU frequency target is 2 gigahertz, which is around 14.3 TFLOPS. 50 to 60% rasterization over existing base PS5 SoC. AMD's XDNA 2 NPU will also be used to accelerate Sony's temporal ML upscaling. So similar to PS4 Pro's checkerboard rendering, this will be used for temporally upscaled 4K output for hopefully higher frame rates. And they also claim it's slated for a September 2024 reveal. Now, the thing is, pretty much right after this all unfolded, the Kepler_L2 account corrected an older post of their own by saying PS5 Pro's GPU config amounts to 32 group-work processors, so it would be 60 CUs total enabled out of 64, and that would be one part of the ResetEra leak that's already not lining up, but that does fit with Tom Henderson's report a few months ago with the CU count being 60. And Kepler also goes on record saying that they don't back that ResetEra leak and that there were a lot of wrong details in there. So presumably they know more that they can vouch for that lineup not being correct. So we can't really look at that and start, speculating on PS5 Pro's potential spec sheet, although some of it seems like a very safe guess, like the console still being, the CPU still being Zen 2. That would presumably be more for compatibility, making sure that it stays compatible with PlayStation 5 software as well. A lot of those games could run into issues if you start making dramatic changes to the CPU, which very well could be a long-term issue, I would guess, with a potential PlayStation 6, but that's, much further along, obviously, and there could be different answers involved for making sure the library stays compatible. But what we can say is that what Tom pointed out, very true. This happens every single time with confidential hardware that gets sent out. It typically goes out to first parties first. They're well trusted. They're owned by the parent company that's making that hardware. Second parties are more trusted, and then third parties, typically that stuff is a lot more risky, but it tends to go through lawyers and it gets a bit complicated. But there is a risk factor involved with those dev kits getting sent out to studios where you can't really control how that info can potentially get let out. So we are now, I think, properly with Tom Henderson having that report months ago, and now third parties having the kits, I think we are in full swing for PlayStation 5 Pro rumors and the rumor mill churning up. So now we can start watching this closely and seeing if we do get more with I guess more valid specs that we can say for sure, okay, this is probably what PlayStation 5 Pro is going to be, which if we do humor the spec sheet that we got so far, that implies that the CPU upgrade is going to be on the minimal side, and that, if Sony is potentially looking at doing temporal machine learning and we could have a lot of games that have unlocked frame rates possibly hitting 60 more consistently, or high frame rate modes being on the upper end of near 120 instead of fluctuating too much. But, you know, with VRR, that can really come in and clean that up. And I'm more curious as to, obviously, pricing, where this is going to slot in. I would expect that a $5.99 price tag is a very real possibility, but it could, you know, things can change in a year, right? So they might sort of price down the existing model by not too much and slot in PlayStation 5 Pro as a more premium $549.99 box. I'm curious about that, and also how they're going to market the device, because it would be, I guess, on the minimal side, and it's very much still going to be a low volume box. They're not going to sell primarily PS5 Pros once that thing is available, so it might be like a 1 in 4, 1 in 5 situation for every PS5 that's sold on the market, but they have to lean into something. PS4 Pro did have a place with 4K TVs being more widely adopted, so with this, I think ray tracing probably would be the way to go, since ray tracing is still, like, at least in the console space, heavily underutilized, and it's a resource hog in most games, so that might be how they want to approach it, but for now, that's what happened this week with PlayStation 5 Pro. Moving on to our next story, The Last of Us Online is not the only thing that died this week. We also lost E3 as well, because it's now confirmed. The Entertainment Software Association did put out a very brief statement saying, and I quote, "After more than 2 decades of E3, each one bigger than the last, the time has come to say goodbye. Thanks for the memories." They did try recently partnering with ReedPop to see if they can put one together this year. That did not pan out, obviously, and they were not saying much about possibly doing a 2024 and beyond, but now it's official. E3 in this current climate with how news is delivered, how expensive it can be to be an exhibitor at E3, yeah, it's over. And I mean, really, GDC is going to, I think, fit in nicely for what E3 was primarily known for, right? It wasn't so much a trade show anymore via retail, but it was a great place for developers to connect, get deals done, and a lot of that stuff tends to happen at GDC, so, and there's other shows as well, right? So it's, you know, unfortunate. I am going to miss E3 for all the things that we got from the event, which everyone likes to, you know, bring up that, oh, the conferences were offsite, they weren't really E3, but they were always like a part of E3, obviously, which we don't have E3 press conferences anymore. We have the online live streams, which, yeah, I'll always be of the mind where it's like they don't have the same punch as the live events with the audience, so those will always be a remnant of E3, but we'll have to move on. Next up, Hideo Kojima and Death Stranding. We have 2 big news stories here. First, the Death Stranding movie, that's signing with A24, the film studio that's done movies like Midsummer or Uncut Gems, Everything Everywhere All at Once. I think that bodes really well for the end result of what this movie may or may not be, but given the film studio's track record and, well, the nature of this film, or what it's going to be based on the story of the game, that is going to be something I want to watch. So, and I like Death Stranding too, so I think that helps. But there's that. And then also the Connecting Worlds documentary, that is going to air globally spring 2024 exclusively on Disney+. So you will need Disney+ if you want to watch the documentary going over Hideo Kojima leaving Konami, opening up the new studio, signing on to make Death Stranding with PlayStation, and so that's when that will release. But yeah, the film, I'm really excited for what that is going to look like if they do it proper with, you know, everybody that they can get on board to play their characters as they did in the games. That will be a real trip. Now, with all that said, it is time for Let's Talk Plus, the weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway, where one of you can win a $10 PSN code. I would like to congratulate this viewer right here. I'll be contacting you very soon via email or X, and if you'd like to win a $10 PSN code, it's so simple. Follow the link down below, enter the Gleam giveaway, and supporting this channel a number of ways can gain you an entry, and I'll announce the winner next week, because I'm trying to help pay for your games. Those are some of the stories from this past week that I wanted to talk about with you all, and our Saturday video was 30 Platinums Part 3. Thank you so much for the outpouring support and kind words about that video finally being out. Really appreciate it. I'm glad most of you enjoyed, I guess, the sort of scaling of how I want to make that so much bigger and more exciting and engaging versus the previous two parts. Kind of did that in a way where I'm like, I don't know if I want to do this again, but everyone was like, oh, I can't wait for part 4. And I'm like, so I don't know, but either way, it's nice that that is out and you were all so nice and supportive about it. And also we had a Tuesday video about the PlayStation 4 grill that I made years ago to try and help lift off this channel a bit. So it's funny that some of you were there and found the channel from that video, or some of you saw it posted elsewhere and didn't know it was me because obviously they were not crediting me, and that was kind of the, you know, shtick of that video. But either way, good segue into, hey, it is Let's Talk PlayStation episode 600, and it's been a bit of a routine around here that we look back on what we did for episode 500, so let's take a look. And actually what I think we should do is really reflect on what we did for episode 400, so take a look. Let's see what we did for episode 300. But just for the hell of it, let's actually take a look at what we did for episode 200. And just for the hell of it, let's actually look at what we did for episode 100. And just for the hell of it, let's take a look at episode 1. Roll it. The game. So now we know a little bit more about it. And stop it. Whoa, okay. Looks like I got a little bit better at this YouTube thing, huh? Alright, I think I'm getting a little better at this YouTube thing. If you haven't picked up on it by now, I'm pretty much going to do this every 100 episodes. So yeah, that clip's getting a bit too long. We have to move that to the end of the show. It's getting harder and harder to watch that and not visibly cringe, but hey, that's what we call growth, right? Still got all my hair. A lot more grays, but I still have it. And, you know, sitting here talking PlayStation, PS3 supremacy, PS5 on in the background, complete in box Pokemon games, and you all still watching 11-something years later. Some things never change, and I am truly grateful for that. With that said, that concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.